So I think we already have a first question. So what the question is, when launching a new brand, how do you decide how to allocate your limited financial resources? I think that's a really important question, especially now. And I think what's most important here is that if you have a business plan up front and you really prioritize what you want to do with your brand, I think that becomes your roadmap for how to spend the financial resources that you have. So, for example, one of the most important things these days is to make sure that you can sell your brand, sell your product or service through the right channels. We know that digital is the way everything's going, especially during COVID. And so we really think that having that right business plan and prioritizing it on there is really your guiding path. Thanks for a great question. So because we are having some problem with our Q&A, and I would ask everyone to please put your questions in our chat boxes. Normally we ask you to do the opposite, but we really appreciate if you could do that today. But here's a couple other questions that are coming in. While some states are allowing restaurants, salons, gyms, and shops to reopen, many small businesses are still struggling financially. What tips can you share for many small businesses on how to stay afloat during this time? Well, one of the most important things we've seen, and in businesses that I've talked to where we've seen the most success, is the ability to pivot. We know that there's about 30% of small businesses that are not online today. And especially with the pandemic and with people's choices to do things more digitally, to buy things online, to sell things online, we think that that's one of the most important things to do. So number one, make sure you pivot. I think number two, to stay afloat, it's a really tough time right now, but there are a lot of resources out there. There's tremendous organizations out there called Small Business Development Councils, and they are available in just about every town and city that most of you are probably in. So what I would suggest is that you contact them. There's more grants available than you would imagine. And the other thing is there's organizations called Community Development Financial Institutions. Google that in your area, and many of those institutions have grant money available. And I would say some of the practical things is take a look at your expenses. Decide what you absolutely have to keep spending on, and those things that are maybes but not must-haves, you should curtail those as well. Thanks for the great question. So we have a question here from Lexi, question about a small business in CBD cannabis. Actually, let's move to this one right now. How do you create a selling strategy for a truly luxury brand? And what's the difference between a mass market strategy and a luxury strategy? Well, one of the things that we find is that people's definition of what a luxury item is different. So for some people, they will continue to buy what they perceive to be luxury items almost as necessities. So I think it'd be really great to really understand your market, look at surveys, understand what your brand, or particularly what your product or service, how that's viewed with brands that are current today. If you find that they're luxury brands, there's going to be specific markets that you're probably wanting to go to. And the other thing is, think about your brand, pivot it. Perhaps even though it's a luxury brand, there's new parts or new pieces that could make it more everyday. And especially in this environment, it's really important to understand how your product and service fits into a number of different groups. So we have another question here, which I think is really important. As the economy starts to reopen, what are the key changes that small businesses will need to make in order to succeed? I think one of the number one things is different channels. As I mentioned before, we have found that businesses that just had a storefront and did not have a way for people to buy online were really having a much more difficult time. So particularly with COVID, we're seeing a new normal. And even though we hope and believe that things are going to move into the normalization phase, you have to think about how getting back to growth. So I think number one is different channels. Can you reach your customer base in not just one way, but a number of different ways, whether it's online, virtual. The other thing is, and something that we at Mastercard are very focused on is how people want to pay. So obviously, giving someone checks and cash is not necessarily optimal. We know that a lot of people want to stay away from that. And so this focus on contactless payments, making sure that you are able to take payments over the phone or digitally through something we call card on file, making sure that you can have your customers keep their card on file so they can make repeat purchases. The other thing is contactless. If they do come into your store, restaurant, whatever type of business you have, so that they can keep hold of their card and just tap to make sure that they can pay. And that's what we call contactless payments. I think those are really the two biggest things that people can do in terms of changing based on the pandemic. So thanks for that. I want to support my local small businesses. Do you have any tips on how or where can I find out which businesses are open right now near me? Well, that's actually a question that's near and dear to my heart. We actually just launched something called Shop Open. And for businesses that accept MasterCard, which is most of them, we're very excited because we have something called Shop Open. And if you Google that, you will see a customer-facing website that will pop up, and you can actually search geographically for your small business in your area. And it will not only tell you if it's open, but it will also tell you if they accept contactless payments. So we're really proud of it. We think it's a wonderful way to drive people back into small businesses. And we absolutely encourage all of you to use it for your local small businesses as well. So we have another question here about small brands that might not be looking to give away a lot of equity from the get-go. And so, what do you do? And I think one of the things that I've learned from talking to some amazing business owners, there's a lot of different approaches. And I think probably what's being referred to is venture funding. And I think that you've got to really, again, think back to your business plan. And you're right, venture funding, a lot of funding sources may require equity, but there's a lot of other funding sources that don't. For example, friends and family. We know that there's a lot of opportunity just in terms of general loans, be it with banks, a lot of fintechs. There's a lot of organizations that are out there to help. And I also very much encourage family and friends is another way. So I think you have to decide how much equity you're willing to give up, and then take a look at the different ways that you can fund your businesses. And it's funny, we just had another question come in. Beside loans, what can be helpful or beneficial to small businesses? I think the things that I mentioned, but the other thing are grants. There's a lot of organizations out there I mentioned, like the community development financial institutions, the small business development councils. There's organizations like Hello Alice that we partner with as well. So I think what happens sometimes is we all get paralyzed. And if you just go online, look in your local areas, you will see a lot of organizations that do have grant money available. I happen to live in Westchester, New York. There's a fantastic organization that I'm on the board of, the Women's Economic Development Council, and they have definitely grants available and a lot of free resources to help. So I encourage all of you to do that. So we have another question here, in terms of what advice do you have for someone who's thinking of taking their side hustle full time and or starting their business during this time? Well, so I will tell you one of my favorite books for people that want to start a business is called The E-Myth. E-Myth. And I'll tell you why I love it. It talks about the fact that whether you're someone who has a side hustle, whether it's baking, whether it's a particular building apps on the side, there's a tremendous opportunity to take that and make it into a business. But one thing that new entrepreneurs have to be careful about is many entrepreneurs don't get into business to do all the stuff that's not as much fun, right? Dealing with the financials, actually managing overall finances, getting customers. Those are all things that are not as much fun. And the E-Myth walks you through that, because even though you went into it to do something you love, you have to be willing to like something you don't love. And that's the other side of the business. So I think that's really important to make sure that when you go into this, you go into these things really with your eyes open. And when it's a side hustle, a lot of times you don't think about that. So I think that's really, really important. Another good question here. Thanks, Liberty. Do you have any advice for growing a small business that thrives on in-person business versus online sales? For example, a coffee shop, event space, or restaurant? Well, this has really been a tough question, but I have to tell you, I have been amazed at the number of restaurants and other particular types of businesses that have really pivoted. I think a great example is Create and Cultivate. Create and Cultivate, who we have an amazing partnership, did a ton of events in person, big events, these kinds of events. And what they've done is really pivoted to a digital approach. And I have just been so impressed how successful they've been, and obviously great leadership with Jacqueline Johnson. But I think that's one way to look at it. The other thing is in terms of coffee shops. What I've seen is a lot of coffee shops were able to morph into takeout and really setting up shop outside the restaurant where people felt more comfortable coming in. I think restaurants, that's really where we talk about getting digitally enabled. Mastercard just built and rolled out a program called Digital Doors. We have great partnerships with Shopify and Squarespace and BigCommerce. We want to help businesses to get online. We also help them in terms of some of the security that they need because of cyber attacks that can happen. And we really bundle all that together because we think getting online is really going to be the most pivotal change that small businesses need to make. So hopefully that will be helpful as you think ahead. While we're waiting for some questions, we had some questions come in the beginning. What are the top 3 actions I can take to build a network of other small business owners and advisors to learn from during these times? I love that question because there's some really great opportunities out there. So this might sound like a broken record, but one of the things that I am most passionate about is LinkedIn. LinkedIn provides the opportunity to join groups. And these are groups of people that probably have very similar businesses like you and very similar problems. And if you join these groups, it really provides a very broad support system. The other thing is associations. I would Google associations, whether it's if you're in the restaurant business, whether you're in the beauty business. There are a lot of associations out there, non-for-profits, that are built to help businesses like yours today. And then the third thing I would suggest is for those of you that have a CPA, very often accountants will work in particular industries. And so someone that focuses on restaurants, they will focus on restaurants a lot. The other thing is looking at companies that cater to different groups. So I'll take restaurants again, organizations like Toast, that really can help gear you to particular things and groups in your industry. So I think, again, LinkedIn, associations, your CPAs, those I think are 3 great sources in order to build a network. And one of the things we're hearing from small businesses today is that people need people around them to help. We know that particularly female entrepreneurs look to network with other female entrepreneurs. And that's why we're so passionate about the space and really build communities around this to help further knowledge, advice, guidance, and also so that people don't feel alone these days. So we're really excited about some of the things we're doing. And I encourage all of you to look up some of these organizations because they're really there to help. So we have another question on besides loans, how can we be helped? And I want to just, because this question is popping up so much on the chat box, I want to reiterate this idea of grants. A lot of people feel that there isn't money out there. I know that many people have gone to PPP loans, which is a great source. But we know there's a lot of grant money out there with a lot of organizations. And a lot of these organizations are local. And we, for example, we work with some phenomenal organizations like Ramin and Accion. And so we really would encourage all of you to reach out to organizations that were started way before COVID, but have really pivoted, especially to help during this time. So I would encourage all of you to look into those. I'm just going to move this chat box over here and move it down. Okay. So another question came in about brand, and this is really a common concern today. And this question is, how can I ensure my evolving brand story resonates with customers as I pivot and reinvest my business? You know, I think that one thing that all of you should remember is that you have built a following. And I think that's what's so great about entrepreneurship. And we see that entrepreneurs create a following of people that love them. People love your brands. And you're not pivoting away from your brand. What you're doing is you're pivoting to tell your customers that due to what's going on, you want to be there for them always. And so you're pivoting to different channels, different approaches. So I think you can always stay true to your brand. I think that's critically important, to stay true to your brand, stay true to the things that really made you what you are today. And when you talk about pivoting, it's really around the channels. It might be some of the products you're selling, but your brand needs to stay the same because that's what you built yourself on. And so I really encourage that, and hopefully that's helpful. All right, I'm going to pick another question here. Again, about, reopening. And we're getting a lot of questions on, if I'm going to reopen, what do I have to do? Should I do something different? Well, the first thing I want to encourage everyone is there's some very excellent guidelines out there from the CDC around reopening. And we did a panel that I think all of you have an opportunity to see with some amazing, amazing women in the beauty industry. And one of the things that they really hit home on is that when they were looking to reopen, they really focused on the safety and health guidelines. And that's really important because one of the important things that came out of the panel is that you want your customers to feel safe. So I think that step one is to really make sure you're looking at the recommendations and guidelines that are out there from the scientific community, like the CDC. And then second of all, really take a look at your product set. Is everything that you offered before going to be important going forward? And do you have to pivot some of those things that you were offering? And I think that's the other important thing that I learned. If it's a service and reopening, for example, a yoga studio, I think everyone knows that there's going to be some very specific things around safety guidelines, but you might want to think about things like putting a table on the outside and offering things as people leave rather than things that you might have had inside. So again, pivoting, not necessarily around your story, but around the things that you've offered in the past. And I think that's really important. Here's a question that came in. Thanks, Amy. Do you have any easy go-to tips on how to help improve and manage cash flow as a small business owner? Well, I will tell you that if cash flow wasn't a problem for you before, COVID has really created some difficulty. Interestingly enough, the average small business owner only has 27 days of cash on hand. The other thing that I would say is that a lot of businesses are still using Excel. So there's a couple things I want to recommend to you. Number one is make sure that you have the right financial systems in place. What a lot of small business owners have told me that if anything, at some point in time, COVID has given them time to rethink, step back, and do some improvements in their business. So I encourage you to look at things like QuickBooks, some of the accounting software programs out there. But another really important thing to think about, and that we've been discussing a lot at Mastercard, is how do we help small businesses actually get their own money in quicker? So you think about if you're a landscaper, a plumber, an electrician, someone that collected money and maybe sent out manual invoices. In fact, we know that about 70% of small businesses actually send out manual invoices. So we think there's a lot of great opportunity now with some of the accounting software packages out there to actually digitize your invoices, because if you can get an invoice out in a day versus a week, you can see how that can really increase your cash flow. And then, of course, the obvious one is if, in fact, you need some extra funds, taking a look at some opportunity out there in terms of borrowing. You know, there's loans, there's lines of credit, there's certainly credit cards. And again, goes back to the grants. But I think number one is understanding your cash flow, understanding what money you have coming in and getting that money to come in quicker. And also the money you have going out. Make sure as you look at the way you're paying your bills that you're really understanding the bill timing. And so when you match the money coming in to the money going out, that's really what cash flow is. And there's some great opportunity, I think, for many businesses to manage it even better. So hopefully that helps. So one of the other questions that came in is, what are the biggest financial mistakes you've seen small businesses make since the COVID-19 crisis hit? Well, I think there's a couple. One of them is in regards to cash flow. I find that a lot of businesses hadn't really gotten their financials in order, so that when they did need to go to get loans or some type of credit, they really weren't prepared to tell the financial story of their business. And that's why I believe so strongly in making sure that you have the financial tools, you know, in order to do that. I think the other thing is people had hope, right? A lot of people were hoping that this crisis would just go away. And the time that it took them to pivot their businesses was a bit too long. And that's why we're really encouraging businesses to look at things like online, creating a digital storefront, offering your services and your products online. And a lot of this is around the timing. You know, I think back to an interview that I did with Jacqueline about pivoting. And one of the things that we talked about was agility. One of the phenomenal things that you guys have out there is agility. Your small business, and you can zig and zag much better than some bigger companies. So really keeping that agility moving and constantly thinking about changes you have to make and getting the help that you need quickly to make them. You know, we think that's really, really important. So I think, again, hopefully those specific things are helpful. And, you know, I think that when you are willing and able to move quickly, lots of things can happen in a really good way. So again, very, very important. You know, one of the other questions that just came through was really about launching a brand new business amidst COVID in the current environment. You know, it's interesting. I just did a webinar recently, and we talked about the number of businesses that were in a very difficult state. We know that probably 60% of businesses are showing a lot of concern that if things don't change in the next 12 months, you know, there's going to be problems. But one of the other things we've heard, and I think all of you should think about this, is that with the closing of businesses and with the new normal, there's been a lot of new businesses able to open. So I think taking a look at what's happening and looking at things that are going to become the new normal that may not change back, and what are some of the opportunities to think about new products and services in order to pivot. And so, yes, we do see that, you know, businesses in general are struggling, but for many new businesses, this is actually a really good time to start it. So, you know, hopefully that's helpful. I'm looking at some of the other questions that came in before. I thought this was a really interesting question. For many small businesses, reopening will be very similar to opening for the first time. And What advice do you have to plan and pay for reopening? So again, I think we talked a little bit before about the safety and security, but I also think that as you're waiting for reopening, so we know that unfortunately in some areas, businesses were allowed to reopen, and then due to resurgence, they've closed again. I believe that for some businesses, when things go backwards, they tend to get paralyzed. I think now is the time, if you haven't reopened, to think about and plan for when you do. What are the safety and security? What do you have to do differently in terms of resetting up your business? It is going to be like opening for the first time, except for one thing, and this is where I want all of you to feel a lot of hope. When you reopen, your brand is already out there. If you're in a small community and they have been coming to your yoga store and they have been coming to your ice cream shop, they already know you, so you're not starting from scratch. And one thing we know, and why we really launched Shop Open, is that we know that a lot of people in the communities want to go to the small businesses that they frequented before. Me personally, we've been ordering out as much as we could during the crisis in order to frequent the restaurants. So you're not starting from square one. You're starting with a brand that people in your community love. I encourage you to use social media. We think that's a fantastic approach. We think that there's a lot of focus on social media. I know a lot of you, from a small business perspective, are not always comfortable using social media because you may not be able to measure the return on investment. But today, as much as you can do to get your customers reposting for you, sharing, using some of the sites that are out there, I think that's really, really important. I'm going to just double check my Q&A to see if that's working yet. So it is not working yet. So one of the other questions I had is, what resources or publications should I work into my daily routine to stay up to speed on trends in pivoting during the pandemic? I think that, again, it goes back to what we talked about before, that our daily routines are messed up, right? The timing that we use to do things is different. And so I really encourage people to take a look at a couple things. Number one, a lot of organizations have set up online resource centers. Mastercard is one. We have set up what's called the Mastercard Main Street Resource Center. And what this does is it really gives a lot of tools and resources that are out there from not just us, but partners. I know Create and Cultivate has a tremendous resource. Hello, Alice, the SBA. So I would encourage you to Google some of these resource centers, and they've got a wealth of information for free to really help push you through this kind of problem phase, normalcy, and then into growth. And then the other thing I mentioned before is, and this is, I think, one of the best kept secrets, is organizations like the Small Business Development Centers, they all have websites. And if you take a look at those websites, and you can actually call them, because I think a lot of them are either back in the office or working virtually. So there are a lot of resources. And I think, again, sometimes people get paralyzed and think, I'm out here alone, and you are not out here alone. It's things like this that should really help you and make you feel that you aren't. So a great question. As a self-funded founder, should I stop paying myself during this time to keep my employees? It's a tough question. And I really think that, and one thing I really encourage is, many people during this phase have reached out to a lot of free experts, financial experts. I think number one is you have to understand what your financial situation is. And if you have applied for PPP, whether you have or not, I really think you have to look at the time that you can survive with the cash flow that you have. I think it's a difficult time, and it's hard for me to say without looking at your financials. But I encourage you to work with your bank, work with your CPA, really understand where you are. And if you've been self-funding up till now and you want to keep operating the way you are, then you might have to pivot to some additional sources of funding. So I think another question that came in, do you think rent forgiveness is going to happen? Again, it's a tough one. One thing I can tell you in the discussions that I'm having with, our people, is that there's a lot of work going on with local governments, with governments to really figure out. And you're right. I know it's very hard to make decisions without knowing. But, I've always kind of lived my life with the adage is, if I'm going to succeed or fail, I want to know that it's because of something that I could control. And I think right now it's easy to focus on the things that you can't control, and that's one of them. And so I encourage everyone to think about, if in fact rent is not forgiven, what will you do then? And I think you have to really look at both sides of the story and be prepared for either one. It goes back to the agility story that I mentioned. This is a very interesting question. I operate a social impact business that supports living wages for women in Ghana. What is the best way to create corporate partnerships for our social impact? Are there specific departments or job titles I should seek to identify the right person in a company? I'll tell you, one of the reasons I'm so proud to work for Mastercard is that we are very focused on doing well by doing good. And I think that most companies that feel that way have put that out there. We have done a tremendous amount of work through our Center for Inclusive Growth. I think that financial inclusion is a word, two words that really would be something to Google in terms of different corporations. I know that financial inclusion is critically important to us. And if you Googled Mastercard and financial inclusion, you would most likely see some of the great work that we are doing. I would say to you that corporate partnerships, it's important, at least I can tell you, that if you are looking to partner with a company, you want to make sure that they have the same values as you do. That is why we at Mastercard have been able to attract such amazing partners like Create and Cultivate, because we all believe in the same thing, which is helping others, doing well by doing good. So I would encourage you to look through financial inclusion, take a look at some of the major corporations in your area and really dig in, look through their annual reports, look at the kinds of things they talk about. If you look at our annual report, if you listen to our CEO, Ajay Banga, he talks about this all the time. And so it's pretty clear to others that are looking for partnerships with Mastercard what we believe in. So again, I think that's a really important approach. And I think that corporate partnerships are really important in these days. And there's a lot of great companies out there that are doing really great things. Okay, so we have another question here. I tuned into Small Biz Big Dreams earlier. What a great session. Thank you. I was thrilled with it. What was your biggest takeaway from moderating that chat? Well, for those of you that haven't had a chance to look at it, I had the opportunity to talk to some amazing women in the beauty industry who have really built their companies against a lot of odds. And I guess my biggest takeaway in talking to these women is that it's very easy to sit where you are if you, let's say you haven't gotten to the point where you want, and look at companies that have and just assume that they got a big break. And my biggest takeaway is how hard it is to build a company and the tenacity that you have to do it. And that there are people out there that will help. And so I was just blown away at these women and how they have taken an idea and built it into something that they can be so proud of. And it took hard work, tenacity, and the biggest thing it took was never listening to no. So I would say that was my biggest takeaway. Also, I learned a lot from these women. I am so grateful to be able to be in a position where I can do panels, talk to so many small business owners every day, because my learning explodes. And most of the information that I get every day is from people actually doing it. And so I feel very lucky there. I'm going to move over to some other questions here. Okay. Let's see. So I want to remind everyone that the Q&A bucket is not working, and so I do have questions in the Q&A. So I would ask all of you to please continue to put your questions in the chat box, and then we can certainly answer them there. Okay. Another question, that I have here that I think is really important, which is, tell me a little bit about pitching your business, and what are some of the keys to that? Well, it's funny. When I talk to customers, and no matter what it is that I've done in my entire career, there is a certain passion, for example, that I feel about small business. And there is a certain passion that should really underlie everything you do. When you're pitching your business, people are looking at your business, but they're also deciding, are you the kind of person that they want to be in business with? Do they believe that you can get people to believe in you and what you're doing? So I think the passion part is very important. The other thing is, based on, in the past, some of the great pitch contests that we've been a part of, and also that we've worked on with Jacqueline and Create and Cultivate, is know your numbers, know your business. I think it's important to be able to answer questions about what is your business plan, but then more importantly, how do you intend to scale your business? So I think those are some really important things to consider before you're pitching your business, to really give people an understanding of where you see things going. What's your go-to roadmap? That's very critically important there. One of the questions that came up is whether we, in terms of our company, and how do we look at business and investing in business. And so, yes, we have made some amazing acquisitions. One that was just reported in the press is Finicity. So we do look at businesses. We believe very strongly in partnership. Mastercard is a technology company. Mastercard has just exploded in terms of its inroads into technology and the focus that we've had on bringing technology to our customers and their customers. And so I think acquisitions are something that we always look at. So here's another question. Hi, Ginger. What does Mastercard do for women small business owners, and how can I take advantage of any of those resources? Well, it's just been amazing what we've been able to do. Last year, we had an incredible campaign where we featured female business owners, really talked about their story, highlighted them. We have formed partnerships with organizations like Create and Cultivate, really built out value propositions, and partnered with companies like Salesforce to provide a CRM system for small business, Intuit to provide QuickBooks and TurboTax discounts, Microsoft. So we work very hard for all small businesses to be able to bring tools and solutions to them. But we have, for example, developed a community of female businesses. We also have an advisory council that offers a lot of opportunity from a mentorship perspective. Things like this, we spend a lot of time doing webinars and really looking at mentorship opportunities like this Mentor Power Hour. So I think Mastercard has been very committed to this space. We're excited that we've been able to touch so many small businesses, but we have had a very strong focus on minority businesses, like female, Black-owned, a lot of minority businesses that we look at in terms of some of the special needs that are out there to see if we can continue to amplify that. But we're really excited about our track record for all small businesses as a whole. Here's an interesting question in terms of, back to the pitching, in terms of some additional tips. So I guess the question that I answered before, I'm just going to tap that a little bit more. I want to lean into a little bit about pitching. When I have had businesses pitch to us in terms of some of the business we've done, Grow Your Biz, and some of the pitches I know, I've been really lucky to be a judge, and I know Create and Cultivate has a great pitch contest that's coming up. Know your business. Again, when someone's putting money in you, whether it's investing in you, whether it's giving you money, if you're being judged versus someone else, it's important in the pitch, number one, know your numbers. Number two, understand how you will scale the business. And number three, what will you use the money for? I think this is a question that I think people sometimes have trouble with. They say, well, I'm going to use it to grow my business. I'm going to use it to go into a different product line, but really be able to answer that question with a lot of specifics and a lot of specificity. I think that's really important to think about that when you're pitching. And the other thing, it's not just pitching for, let's say, venture money. It's not just pitching for grants. It's not just pitching for contests, but how you pitch really can become a part of your advertising and social media approach when you're pitching what you do to potential customers out there. So again, I want to remind everyone to put some questions into the chat box. Just going back and looking at some of these. Here's one. So we actually had someone ask a question from Grameen America who's really interested in some of the programs. And I think that organizations like Grameen and Axion, the Urban League, have had some wonderful stories with the National Black Chamber of Commerce. A lot of these organizations do such great work in terms of grants. But the other thing is that they really do a lot of work in terms of advice and guidance. And I know a lot of people are searching for that. So in the past, if people get, let's say, feeling not so great about getting a grant, I would still encourage your outreach to these organizations, because if it's not grant money, there's a lot of opportunity that they have in terms of giving you ideas, guidance, connecting you into other organizations. I know that Mastercard is very focused on working through some of these great organizations like a Grameen, and really providing some of the advice and guidance and also solutions that we offer. For example, some of the cyber protection that we offer, there's a lot of groups out there that want to get information on cyber protection out there that we're looking to partner with. So I think it's important to the great person who asked the question from Grameen to take a look at all the things we offer, so that when you're working with a business, you have the opportunity to bring up whether it's Mastercard or other companies, other resources out there. We think that's really important. This is a really good question. I love your partnership with Create and Cultivate. It feels really authentic. And how do you choose your partners? Well, you used the word that I was just going to use. Mastercard, as I mentioned, has a very strong focus on doing well by doing good. And we look at partners that also believe that too. So it's really important to us when we partner with organizations like Create and Cultivate to know that there's an authenticity, that they do care about small business. They do care about businesses. They do care about minority entrepreneurship. It's important to us to not just have people who say it, but also show it. And so we look at the work that's being done. We look at what that company says, how it represents itself. And those are some of the ways that we choose. And I think it's great that because of the way we conduct ourselves and just the great approach we have and the caring approach we have, we tend to attract really great companies that do that too. So the partnerships that I mentioned before, like Salesforce and Intuit and Microsoft, these are all great organizations that have a very strong approach to financial inclusion and caring, and that's why we're really proud to be able to partner with them. So thanks. That was really, it's an important question, and I really appreciate it. Here's a question. I launched an energy and wellness drink with plans to roll out in city bodegas. How would you approach launching in retail with social distancing? You know, it's a tough one, but one of the things that we're seeing is, for example, a lot of these bodegas, or particularly grocery stores, stayed open during the pandemic. And a lot of them you are able to talk to in terms of launching brands. But I think reaching out to these particular groups, even something as if you're in a particular area, look at the blocks, look at the bodegas that are open. Look at some of the grocery lines, the specialty stores that are out there. Give them a call. Now more than ever, they're looking for brands and solutions that are going to help people during this time. And so I think that it's really important that you look at your brand and understand how it would fit into one of these organizations. The other really important thing is setting up a digital storefront. So I think, selling your brand through another organization is certainly great and important, but also what's the opportunity that you have to start creating an online presence for yourself through things like digital doors, some of the things that are put out there that we've put out there. And I think that's another opportunity as well, because again, I'll bring up the stat again, 30% of small businesses do not have an online digital presence. So we think there's a great opportunity to do that. Good question here. What are the 3 most important things to remember when first opening a business? Well, this is one of my favorite questions. I think number 1 is, I'm going to go back to what I said, read the E-Myth. I think that's really important because a lot of people, when they're looking to open their business, are thinking about the thing that they love. So for example, if they love making ice cream, or they love making specialty cakes, or they love creating candles at home, think about the other parts that you have to do when you run a business, making sure that you can manage your financials, creating the right business plan, making sure, really sure, that you have a plan B should something happen, like a pandemic in this case, where you have to pivot. So I think it's really making sure you have a business plan that has the fullness to it, all the information that you need, and then really think about how you're going to fund it. Is it going to be self-funded? Is it going to be funded through friends and family? Are you someone that could get an angel investor? One of the questions I had at one of our last great meetings with Create and Cultivate, the last mentor session we did, is about, finding potential angel investors. And just Googling your product or service, the class that it's in, candles or whatever, you will find people that have actually invested in these types of businesses or really moved toward those types of businesses. So I think there's some really great ways to do that. So thanks for that question. Hopefully that helps. And if you're thinking of opening a business, now you've got a little more time to plan. I encourage you to do that. All right, I'm going to look back up here to see what more questions we have. Excuse me. So here's a good question, right up my alley. Hi, Ginger. When do you think is the right moment to open a business credit card? Well, first of all, one of the things that I really encourage is to talk to your bank if you have a banker. We work very closely with our partners, many of which are banks all over the country. And if you don't have a bank, it would be really important to get a bank, to get someone who can give you financial advice, who can look over your financials, to really help you decide when is the right time. We have many small businesses that might have started out with a consumer card and then really doing the right thing, which is to separate out your business expenses. So as soon as you can do that, really thinking about talking to the right people, whether it's a bank or some of other great organizations that can provide credit cards for you. We think that's really important. Mastercard works well through our partners, and we encourage people to work through those partners to be able to decide when the right time is. I think what's important to know is that you are not in this alone. There's some great credit unions, community financial institutions, banks. There's a lot of fintechs out there that are able to provide credit cards. And so I would look to one of them and really focus and bring the right questions to the table so that you can be helped to decide when to do that. Because it's probably not a decision that you're going to make alone. You're going to want someone to help you with assessment of where you're sitting at the moment financially. Okay, I'm just looking at some other questions here. We don't have a lot more time, but we have time for a few more. So again, reminding everyone to put questions into our chat box. we will continue to answer them. All right, here's another question on social impact. And if you operate a social impact business, I think it's really important to understand that there are so many organizations out there that were built around social impact. So organizations like Ramin, Action. And I think that if you have a social impact business, something that you've set up for a particular love or reason or idea, I think it's really important to reach out to these organizations that were set up for those same reasons. There's so much advice and guidance out there, and I think sometimes people are afraid to reach out to what they perceive to be a bigger organization than them. Grameen, even though it's really grown to be a phenomenally big organization, has huge opportunity to help all small businesses from beginning and growth. So I think it's important that if you are opening a social impact business, that you really look to socially impactful companies and what they've done to build the brand in that. I think that's really important. Clearly now more than ever, there's a lot of focus on this, and there's a lot of organizations out there that are here to help. Okay, I think we have just another few minutes, so I'm going to look back at some of these other questions that we received before. Here's a really, I think, good question, and one that to almost end on, which are, what are some of the smartest financial moves you've seen small businesses make in the midst of the pandemic? So there's been a couple. I think number one, and I've brought it up before, which is this concept of pivoting. How do we pivot during this time? And I think some of the most successful businesses that I've seen did not wait to pivot. They were able to pivot during this time and thinking through it before. And I think that's really, really important. So businesses that have looked to pivot, I think, is critically important. The other thing is different channels. So if you know that you deliver your products and services one way today, what are some of the channels that you could build to, in the future? So I mentioned online. This is a very, very important channel. And so businesses that have decided, look, my storefront is closed. Yoga, gyms, a lot of them have gone to virtual. Trainers, a lot of them have gone to virtual. And actually, some of the businesses that I've spoken to have kept up a lot of their volume. So I think it's really important from a pivot and looking at differentiated channels. Those are two really, really important financial moves. Do you have any advice for someone with all the ideas but no drive or desire to implement and only plant the idea? This is a really interesting idea, and this is where partnerships come in. I have found that there are a number of businesses out there with really great ideas, and very often what some of these people do is they look to partner with someone that's really good at execution. So take a look around you, take a look at people that you've come across, and I think the ability to not just have the idea, but execution is critical. And sometimes you can't do it alone. Sometimes developing partnerships with other people, going into it together, finding someone that maybe has a strength you don't have, or you adding your strength to someone else. I think that's really important, that we don't have to do this alone. So another question, and I think I'm going to end on this because we're getting close to time. Thanks, Ginger. Love your spirit. Any tips on how to embrace positive energy during this time? Well, thank you. I think sometimes some people think I have a little too much energy, but look, I think it comes back to passion. I have been working with small businesses my entire career. I go to sleep at night feeling very sad sometimes because of the trouble and trauma that a lot of small businesses are going to. But I wake up every day knowing that I have at least 10 hours to be able to think of something that can make a difference. And I think that's where my positive energy comes from, which is the belief that I can make a difference, that I can spend an hour with all of you, and hopefully that you can walk away with one or two tips where you'll either feel better, do something different. So even if it's you talking to a fellow small business owner, frequenting a small business, and maybe while you're there saying a couple positive words, I think we have to transfer positive energy. It's critically important that we do that, because if we don't, then we're sitting alone with our own thoughts. Share those thoughts, share those beliefs. look, this has been just a terrible, terrible time, but we will come out of this. We will come out of this on the other side strong, because small businesses, all of you, whether you're in a small business, whether you're thinking of a small business, you are here today at the Beauty, Self-Care, Wellness, Health Summit because you believe there's something more to learn. And I would encourage all of you to continue to think positive, to continue to believe in what you're doing, because what you're doing will help. And so with that, I want to thank you all for joining. Amazing questions. Love it. Love spending time with you. And thank you to Jacqueline and Create and Cultivate for the tremendous opportunity that Mastercard has had to partner with you on this amazing journey. And so with that, please everyone, stay safe and stay positive. Thank you so much.